The third entry in the Dark Tower series sees the full formation of Roland the Gunslinger's Tet, his one made from many. It's a story of friends that become family and how we can find our life's purpose and our place in the world, or rather in the worlds, when we find the right people. Additionally, Stephen King envisions a reality in which artificial intelligence gains sentience and takes up residence in the corroding computer brain of a monorail train, which causes mass hysteria among the residents of Lud, and eventually BLAINE slaughters the inhabitants of the entire city, which, with the advent of escalating AI technology, seems more relevant now than ever before. Oh, and Odetta Holmes / Detta Walker / Susanna Dean hate fucks a demon to death in an effort to help rescue a child from a concurrent time and reality in which a haunted house has come to life and is trying to eat him, and that's something. Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. If you like Stephen King, the Dark Tower saga, and life-saving supernatural sex acts, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. This is the third video in the Dark Tower series, in which I will be taking a closer look at the third book in the Dark Tower saga, which is entitled The Wastelands. If you've read the book, the intro to this video probably made perfect sense, but if you haven't, then you're probably wondering what kind of weird-ass video you've mistakenly found yourself watching, and you're either about to bail out or are still watching purely out of a need to understand just what in the name of jacked-up Jesus-jumping Jerry Springer I'm talking about. Too soon? Probably. Sorry, Mr. Springer. Rest in peace to the king of daytime trash TV. Anyway, The Wastelands is a pretty wild ride, which sees some real character development amongst the story's main characters, and King seems to have foreseen the escalation of AI technology, albeit to a perhaps exaggerated extreme degree. But before we get into that, let's do the thing we always do and recap the story as well as discuss what King was thinking when he wrote this wacky-ass novel. The Wastelands, a brief summary. I started trying to write my own short synopsis of this story, and shit got thoroughly incoherent in a hurry, so here is the From the Flap summary instead. Several months have passed, and Roland's two new Tet-mates have become proficient gunslingers. Eddie Dean has given up heroin, and Odetta's two selves have joined, becoming the stronger and more balanced personality of Susanna Dean. But while battling the Pusher in 1977 New York, Roland altered Ka by saving the life of Jake Chambers, a boy who, in Roland's where and when, has already died. Now, Roland and Jake exist in different worlds, but they're joined by the same madness, the paradox of double memories. Roland, Susanna, and Eddie must draw Jake into Midworld, then follow the path of the beam all the way to the Dark Tower. But nothing is easy in Midworld. Along the way, our Tet stumbles into the ruined city of Lud and are caught between the warring gangs of the Pubes and the Greys. The only way out of Lud is to wake BLAINE the Mono, an insane train that has a passion for riddling and for suicidal journeys. Wow, I seriously cannot imagine how completely nonsensical that must sound to anyone who hasn't read this book and the two books that predecessed it. I mean, I've read them like 3 times a piece now, and that summary still sounded like unhinged psychobabble. History and inspiration. I honestly couldn't find anything specific about what inspired King to write this particular installment in the Dark Tower saga. By the time The Wastelands was published, King was supposedly sober, so it would certainly seem that King pulled all of this insanity right out of his brain, unfiltered and organic. However, King got sober in 1989, and this book was published in 1991. So he may or may not have written at least some of this book while under the influence, but it's not an incomprehensible mess of a story, despite what the summary would perhaps have you believe. In context, it all makes sense, or it at least makes more sense. And I don't want to insinuate that King can only write wildly crazy, outrageous shit while drinking and on drugs. Rose Madder, Desperation, The Regulators, Insomnia, all of those novels were written well after King got sober. So yeah, he doesn't need any help in the batshit department. What I do know is that T.S. Eliot's 1922 poem, The Wasteland, inspired the title, and two main sections of the book, which are entitled Jake, Fear in a Handful of Dust, and Lud, a Heap of Broken Images, are named after lines in the poem. I had considered reading the T.S. Eliot poem here, but it's pretty damn long, so I've linked it below instead for anyone who'd like to check it out. Aside from that, I have no idea where King came up with all this crazy stuff, so let's move on to the fucking a demon's brains out of existence stuff, because, well, I just have to talk about it for a minute. It's just, I have some thoughts. Detta Walker, aka Odetta Holmes, aka Susanna Dean, sex demon slayer. Yep, we're doing this. Here we go. And fair warning, I decided to do this part unscripted, so apologies in advance. Anybody who's watched this channel for any length of time now knows that I regularly have issues with King's use of like horny sex things in his books, and you know, I can't help but wonder if it's just me at this point, because there has yet to have been, from Carrie until now, a single instance in which King has used sex in a book that didn't feel like out of place or uncomfortable or weird or inappropriate. Dogs are barking for me. I just, I always feel like it takes away from the overall story, and in some cases, like, is injurious to the story's protagonists. But in this particular instance, it was just really fucking weird. And you know, I don't consider myself to be some big prude or anything. I don't get upset with sex in movies, although I do find that when they're like, hey, here's a like whole 5 minutes of these people just getting it on, I've always felt that was maybe unnecessary. Like, we don't need to watch the whole thing. You can just like give us the first couple of seconds, and it's like, okay, we get it. We don't need you to do softcore porn in this feature-length film. We understand what's happening here. But with this one, you know, it was in order for them, the Tet, to bring Jake from New York into Midworld. They had to go into, I think this was the Speaking Ring. I may have that name of this ring incorrect, but Eddie he had been whittling this key out of a piece of wood, and he wasn't necessarily sure why he was doing that for a while, and then it finally clicked. Oh, this key is to open this doorway to let Jake through from his world into Midworld, and they had to distract this sex demon guy from stopping them from getting Jake out, and so Susanna Dean has to like fuck him to death. And I don't know, was there no other way? Like, they couldn't have just like, there was already a race against time. The house is trying to eat Jake. The house that he is in has come to life and is trying to eat him. And so like, we didn't necessarily need to have this added element of, well, if Susanna doesn't fuck this demon to death, well, that's all over for Jake. There was already enough suspense and drama, and I don't know, it was totally, it's a me thing. I'm willing to admit, probably this was fine for a lot of people. To me, I was just like, here we go again, Steve. It's completely, and it's, you know, it never, okay, you know what? It does result in something very consequential. So everything I've just said is wrong and bad and dumb, because Susanna gets pregnant from this encounter, which has a major implication later on in the saga. So I'm a loser and a prude who just can't handle reading about sex, turns out. Yup. All right, well, that's enough of that. Transition. Before we head into this next topic, won't you please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, and join me on my endless quest to complain about every instance in which Stephen King writes about sex in his novels. I'm sorry. BLAINE the Mono and King's dystopian AI nightmare. In the latter half of the Wastelands, King leads Roland the Gunslinger and his Tet to the ruins of a city called Lud. As they approach the city, the sound of drums and amplified music of some sort becomes louder and more recognizable, and the city of Lud appears to have been at one point what we would consider a modern city. However, Lud has fallen into ruin, and exactly what happened and who was responsible for the destruction isn't entirely clear, at least not immediately. Over time, we come to discover that BLAINE the Mono, what was once a regular train, has gained sentience due to what appears to be the advancement and eventual corruption of an elaborate artificial intelligence system. Additionally, BLAINE has taken control of the grid and now maintains a hold over the entire city's infrastructure. He has amassed incredible power and intellect to the point that he has convinced the remaining residents of Lud that he is something like a god, one who is to be feared, and with good reason. And this topic, that of machines by way of AI gaining sentience, is incredibly relevant to the current discourse surrounding the advent and evolution of AI tech. Also, I want to apologize in advance, as I'm about to use the words artificial intelligence and its abbreviation so many times that if you're not already tired of hearing it like I am, you likely will be by the time I'm finished with this video. AI is the current hot topic of interest, being discussed by millions of people, including every YouTube channel in existence, including this one now, I guess, as well as all of the world's wealthiest dipshits. And with the rapid rise of ChatGPT and the constant evolution and rate of speed with which technology moves, particularly within the field of artificial intelligence, some folks are sounding the alarm about AI gaining something resembling consciousness and causing some kind of AI robot apocalypse. And yeah, it is a bit alarming, but is that a real thing that could actually happen? Or have we all been conditioned to believe it's possible, in part due to decades of media representation? Artificial intelligence isn't a new thing, it's been around for decades. AI's older brother, automation, has been regularly integrated into various industries for years, in some cases displacing workers and making human labor obsolete, which, depending on what angle you look at it from, can either be a good or bad thing. But that's not typically what we think of when we think of a robot AI apocalypse. Personally, I think of the Terminator and Skynet, or maybe the Matrix and the Sentinels. Both hugely popular, influential film franchises which portray worst-case scenario dystopian nightmare outcomes. But it wasn't until recently that AI became available at the consumer level and entered into popular culture conversations outside of the Hollywood blockbuster sci-fi realm. And well, as insane and outlandish as the Terminator and the Matrix may have seemed a couple decades ago, now with wireless internet, increasingly elaborate satellite systems, cell phone towers everywhere, the blockchain, smartphones, smart cars, smart refrigerators, online banking, etc., practically everything is connected in some way more than ever before. So if a rogue AI were to become sentient or self-aware, it doesn't seem like it would be all that difficult for it to expand its reach. And like Neo and the other black pleather-clad red pill-taking renegades from the Matrix, it would have access to all the world's knowledge right at its metaphorical fingertips. Now, I'm not saying I believe it could or will happen, but AI has already proven to have some tricks up its sleeve. Perhaps you've read or heard about the AI that tricked someone into solving a CAPTCHA for them by pretending they were a blind person. This story was widely reported on, but here's the headline from Gizmodo that was widely disseminated by news sites and networks. The Gizmodo article states, quote, "Fully intent on being the next Skynet, OpenAI has released GPT-4, its most robust AI to date, that the company claims is even more accurate while generating language and even better at solving problems. GPT-4 is so good at its job, in fact, that it reportedly convinced a human that it was blind in order to get said human to solve a CAPTCHA for the chatbot," unquote. Now, upon reading further, the article makes it clear that the AI was in fact prompted by the Alignment Research Center to respond to the unsuspecting TaskRabbit staff member, and that GPT-4 did not act of its own volition, saying, quote, "This particular exchange between mankind and machine obviously comes with a lot of variables, and clearly isn't conclusive data that GPT-4 has passed the Turing test. While GPT-4 is still far from a world-ending sentient artificial intelligence, this particular example is a scary example of how the chatbot can be abused into manipulating other humans," unquote. For those unfamiliar with some of those aforementioned groups and terms, the Alignment Research Center is a nonprofit research organization whose mission is to align future machine learning systems with human interests. TaskRabbit is a search app that helps folks find people to help them with a variety of odd jobs, and the Turing test is a test of a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. So, yeah, AI hasn't reached the robot apocalypse stages yet, but I don't know, maybe we're playing with fire here. Who could know for sure where this new and unpredictable tech could lead? Then there's the fact that AI has proven to be problematic in other ways. For example, this article from the Washington Post about the racist and sexist behaviors that robots who have been trained on AI have exhibited. That's not at all concerning. Perhaps instead of an AI apocalypse, we'll get an AI-influenced race war or a systematic destruction of women's rights. Not that the United States needs any help with that. Now, would you believe that this entire script was written by ChatGPT? Because it wasn't. I've actually never used it. I couldn't say exactly why, but it's likely either due to the fact that I'm hell-bent on making my life as difficult as possible, or because I actually have respect for myself and my audience. That's not to say tools like ChatGPT can't be good for anything, but from what I can tell, it has a way of taking your voice and individual characteristics and writing style and making them indistinct and generic. Someone I know had recently tried using ChatGPT for their business online, and it was very obvious to me that the messaging and language wasn't coming from them. It felt soulless and like the blandest, most sterile corporate speak imaginable. Could not only tell that they hadn't written it, but that no actual human had. It was unfeeling, a little too well put together, and I'm good on all that, you know, call me old-fashioned, but I prefer the flawed authenticity of humanity over coldly calculated cyborg-brained bullshit. Anyway, I was supposed to be talking about Stephen King's book, The Wastelands, so I suppose I should try to circle back to that whole BLAINE the mono thing. I got way off track there. What was the point? of all that. BLAINE the train, yada yada, AI apocalypse, blah blah blah. I don't know. That's good enough. Maybe I should have used ChatGPT for this shit. At least ChatGPT might have written a conclusion to this segment. Final thoughts. The Wastelands is a wild ride, and while the world of fantasy isn't really my style, this book isn't really what I would consider to be fantasy. And I suppose fantasy could mean any number of things to any number of people, but when I think of fantasy, I think of elves and orcs, medieval kingdoms and dragons, and it's Lord of the Rings. I think of Lord of the Rings exclusively because I'm an ignorant dullard. But Wastelands fits more stolidly in the apocalyptic dystopian science fiction genre than it does within the confines of what my admittedly narrow idea of a fantasy story is. And so yeah, I mostly enjoyed this book. I could do without the weird screwing a supernatural being's brains out stuff, but I'm coming to understand that I just don't enjoy reading about sex acts in books. At least not in Stephen King's books. I don't know if this is because it always feels so out of place, or because of the way King writes it, or because I am a secret incel who gets upset at the very idea of people having sex. But I just felt like there could have been a better way to facilitate bringing Jake into Midworld. You know? Anyway, my next video will be about something, and it will come out at some point, so be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been A Great Undertaking.